Pascagoula, Mississippi was once a sleepy fishing village of roughly 5,000 people. Located on the Gulf Coast, it became a major industrial city for Mississippi once World War II broke out, where it soon became a major hub for the shipbuilding industry for the U.S. Navy. Thanks to the increase of available work, its population boomed as well, having gone from roughly 5,000 people to over 27,000 by 1970. On October 11, 1973, the now city of Pascagoula, Mississippi, drew attention from those that weren't interested in their ships, but the people. During the evening, 2 fishermen became specimens observed by beings that left them paralyzed by fear, in an event that has become one of the most well-documented alien abduction stories, the Pascagoula Alien Abduction. Hello everyone and welcome to Wicked Encounters, where we explore just what goes bump in the night. I'm your host Allie, and today we're covering the Pascagoula Alien Abduction case. Regarded as one of the most famous UFO sightings in history, the case involves 2 fishermen, Charles Hickson, who was 42, and Calvin Parker Jr., who was 18. The 2 had been friends, along with Hickson's son and Parker's father, who all lived close by one another and would regularly go fishing or camping, or what have you, as a group. Parker was able to get a job at the shipyard thanks to Hickson, which led to the events on October 11th. The 2 men decided that after work, they would go fishing on the west bank of the Pascagoula River near the drawbridge. While fishing, they saw something surreal that would change their lives forever. Hickson had just caught a fish when something caught his attention as a zipping sound made its way to his ears. When he turned around, he noticed a craft 60 to 70 feet away, hovering above the ground with bright blue lights all around it. After a moment, one end of the craft opened up, and 3 beings came out. Humanoid in shape and standing roughly 5 feet tall, these beings had no eyes, but carrot-like growths where their nose would have been on a human, and slits for mouths. With no discernible neck, the beings' heads seemed to simply sit on their bodies, made up of pale, wrinkly skin like an elephant. These beings hovered over to the men, their feet seemingly fused together as 2 went for Hickson and the other for Parker. The 2 fishermen were grabbed, the strange humanoids not having hands but instead lobster-like claws or pinchers that they used to hold onto the men by their arms. When Hickson was grabbed, he became paralyzed, unable to move even his eyes as he saw Parker have the same thing happen to him. Though for Parker, he then soon fainted. Before he went out though, he said he heard the being who grabbed him hum, and it was the only noise he heard from the strangers. The 2 men were brought into the spacecraft that Hickson described as similar to being inside of a light bulb from how bright it was. The men were separated, but going off of what Hickson claimed to have seen in his book UFO Contact at Pascagoula, beyond the brightness, he saw what resembled a massive eye coming out directly from the wall. He tried to turn away or close his eyes as the mass came towards him, but was unable to, and could only watch as this eyeball barreled down upon him before stopping 6 inches from his face, and then, slowly, it began scanning along the entirety of his body, up and down. The 2 spent roughly 30 minutes aboard the craft, being subjected to a series of different tests and examinations before their abductors brought them back to the exact spot that they had been picked up from. When Hickson looked about to get his bearings, he saw Parker standing nearby with his arms outstretched and looking like he was terrified. As Hickson went to make sure he was all right, he heard the zipping sound once more, and saw the blue flashing lights as the aircraft rose up and then took off north at an incomprehensibly fast pace, making it seem to almost disappear in an instant. Their experience was over. The 2 men ran to their car to head home, when Hickson said that they needed to tell the authorities about their experience, in fear that it could be the start of an invasion. So they changed course and went to the sheriff's department between 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night to speak to the sheriff, Fred Diamond, about what they had experienced. The sheriff felt they were hysterical with their ravings, or drunk. Still, they interviewed the men, with Parker saying it felt more like an interrogation. The investigators even admitted to have secretly recorded the two men in hopes that they'd catch them dropping the act when they were alone, but found them to be continuing to talk to each other about what they had just experienced. Once they left the sheriff's office, Parker said he didn't want to tell anyone else his story, with Hickson agreeing not to say anything, though that didn't last long, as Hickson soon began telling everybody who would listen, especially the media. And oh, how the media wanted the scoop on what happened to the two abductees. Overnight, the abduction became national news.
In the quiet Mississippi town of Pascagoula, two local men confronted authorities with a rather bizarre story.
The pair did go to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Fred Diamond was the county sheriff at the time.
We questioned them at length, and then we left the room and recorded all the conversation they had.
With news conferences, articles, requests for interviews, talk shows, everything. The Mississippi Press, the Daily Herald, Delta Democrat Times, Metro Edition, Rolling Stone. The entire city was abuzz with articles about the UFO and alien sighting. The police at Pascagoula received thousands of calls for the upcoming week of people terrified of what was happening, while believers all across America made their way to the city wearing tinfoil hats to keep their brains safe. Literally. Now you know where that stereotype comes from. Hickson was a well-known figure in his community. After the abduction, he would tell people all about what had happened, and Parker believed him to be the reason their encounter made it to national news. And he was more than likely correct. He would handle most interviews, and had even gone on Johnny Carson, Dick Cavett, and, to tell the truth, to retell his tale of what the two had gone through to the thousands of people who would tune in. 10 years after the encounter, Hickson released his book, UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Years and years later, he told his son that while he was eating an orange under a tree, an odd sensation overcame him, and he looked over, where two of his abductors stood, watching him from a distance. At that moment, he described it like a signal reaching his brain, telling him that the two meant him no harm, and that they would be returning.
I'll be back.
Before they simply disappeared. While skeptics called the two liars, the men have apparently never altered their story. Well, that is until 2018. Where Hickson was great and seemingly reveled in the media circus, Parker, being much younger, was not. He wanted to forget the whole thing had happened in the beginning, though still shared his experiences with others from time to time, and did go on a few TV shows to talk more about it. He actually said he distanced himself from Hickson after the older man told the media what happened, since the two had agreed not to share it with others. He initially claimed he had passed out, but in 2018 changed his story, saying he did actually remember what happened to him, and was so afraid he was infected with something from the aliens that when he got home from the sheriff's, he took a bath in bleach. A few weeks after the encounter, he married his fiancée, who he told the story of what he had gone through 3 days after it had happened, and the two soon skipped town. Parker picked up some work in oil fields, making good money, but each time someone would say they recognized him at a job, he would quit and move on to the next one available. That being said, he slowly came out of hiding in his later years, releasing a book of his own in 2018 titled Pascagoula: The Closest Encounter, My Story, and a second book in 2019 titled Pascagoula: The Story Continues, New Evidence and New Witnesses. So, if not aliens, what could it have been? Well, Hickson and Parker have their believers, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the world's foremost UFO expert, who was quoted as saying that the two were absolutely honest. They had many more skeptics. Some, such as aviation journalist and UFO skeptic Philip J. Klass, noticed discrepancies in Hickson's account of the events, and after the latter refused to take a polygraph test, Hynek doubled down on his belief that the story was made up. Another skeptic, Joe Nickel, alleged that Hickson may have seen the encounter while going through a hypnagogic hallucination. A hypnagogic hallucination are hallucinations that happen when you're between sleeping and being awake. They can feel incredibly realistic. I've actually experienced two of my own in my life, though they were more of the hypnopompic version. Hypnagogic is falling asleep, and hypnopompic is waking up. I'd think I was in the wrong part of my house and try to go back to my room, but there would be something in my way every time. Boxes or totes would appear, and I'd try to get them out, and frustrated, eventually call my parents for help. They'd turn the light on, and voila! I'm not in the living room, but my closet, which I came out of years ago. It's an incredibly unnerving sensation, and can be accompanied with feelings of impending threat, sensations of floating, spinning, or falling. The floating sensation specifically can be linked to Hickson's retelling of being on the craft, as he described the entire encounter as him being floated or hovering about during the tests and examinations. As for Parker, Nichols said he was highly suggestible, especially since he had told the police that he had passed out at the beginning of the incident and failed to regain consciousness until it was over. Basically, Nichols viewed it as a younger man simply going along with what his elder had said. Now, Parker did say that as far as forgetting everything went, that was the only lie he had told, and in 2018 actually said that he remembered everything, though this was also around when his book was coming out. It could be possible the whole thing was an elaborate hoax and attempt at a cash grab for their stories, but Parker claimed that Hickson was actually asking him for help in paying his electric bills each month much later on in life, and Hickson's son claims that despite his various appearances and discussions with people, he would only ever ask for enough money to cover a day of missed work. It would have been much easier to believe the fisherman's tale if they had other witnesses, who claimed to have seen the incredibly bright spacecraft, especially since they were abducted so close to the Pascagoula River drawbridge that was operated by two bridge tenders at all times during 1973. One was on the other side of the abduction location, but the other was actually right next to it. In a photo depicting Hickson bringing an interviewer to the abduction location, you can actually see the bridge tender box behind Hickson's head. Why didn't the tenders see anything or come forward if they did? Why didn't anyone come forward, considering that they were not in a secluded area, but a spot that had quite a few private residences and businesses? Well, perhaps that comes down to people not wanting to be labeled as crazy. Hickson and Parker had many people saying they were liars, drunks, or just otherwise questioning their credibility. Those claims could easily be shared with anyone else who came to corroborate their story, or the person could look like they were trying to mooch off of the potential stardom of Hickson and Parker. But as with everything, times change. Fairly recently, within the last 6 to 7 years, more witnesses had come forward.
He was on board, and it apparently was about the same. It was apparently, they thought it was after the Calvin and Charlie abduction, but they weren't sure.
You saw some blue lights. Kind of walk us through the actual event of what happened.
Well, we got to the pier, we sat down and had started fishing.
This area somewhere, the blue light, and it was over, just like I said, right over where they were abducted.
Claiming that they saw the bright blue lights, the spacecraft, and how the two men were abducted. One man claimed to have seen it while driving home with his date when he saw what looked like 6K LED lights over the water, while at this time, LED lights didn't even exist. At the same time, a woman claimed to have seen the ship from her backyard from across the river. And another woman with a group of friends claimed they saw it while driving for a night in town. All of them had sworn not to say anything to avoid looking like a bunch of loonies, until all these years later. In 2019, Rebecca Davis came forward to say that she had seen the craft while waiting with her husband Jerry Blair, for he was leaving to work offshore via boat. They were waiting for the boat to arrive when she saw bright blue lights rising up in the sky and hovering over where the two men were abducted.
I noticed a blue light come up in the sky over there, and then I seen it start going. It was following the riverbank, the river here, and it would go so far down, and then it would turn around, and it would come back.
45 years later, Davis finally met with Parker to give the man's story validation, and it worked. Parker said that having his story be questioned and doubted for most of his life had been a weight on him. He had been to multiple hospitals throughout his life and had repeated emotional issues after the event. To have a witness come forward and tell him that he wasn't crazy, that he didn't make it up, that helped ease his mind a ton. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker are now both deceased. Charles Hickson died on September 9, 2011 from a heart attack at the age of 80. Calvin Parker died from kidney cancer on August 24, 2023 at the age of 68. A historical marker now overlooks the site of their abduction, thanks to the organization and planning done by Rebecca Davis and Main Street Pascagoula. Davis also organized an annual community celebration for the two men's story every October. The city of Pascagoula is much more accepting of their inclusion in history books involving UFOs and alien encounters, with many shops and businesses having a little alien located somewhere to keep the story going. Whether the abduction truly happened or not, well, it depends on what you believe, I suppose. I just hope that Hickson and Parker were able to enjoy their lives to the utmost in the end. But what do you think? Do you think Hickson and Parker were abducted by aliens? Do you think the beings that took them onto their spaceship were super odd-looking, or could they have been wearing suits? Do you want to hear more alien abduction tales and the species we've come to, quote, know of? Let me know in the comments. I read them all for future video ideas and to see how many other people enjoy learning about spooky stuff like myself. If you want to see what I release in the future, consider subscribing, liking this video, clicking the bell, and sharing it with others. Many of my videos are thanks to suggestions given to me, so feel free to let me know what you'd like to see covered next. If you'd like to support me in other ways, consider checking out my Patreon. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a big thank you to mine. You guys rock, and I'm so very thankful to have your support. With that, I'm Allie, this is Wicked Encounters, and I'll see you next time. Bye!